History remembers names, but it often forgets the men who carried them. A moment of silence holds more power than 1,000 cheers. What did the judge see in that name? Let us know in the comments section below, and make sure you subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. He didn't flinch when the officer twisted his arm. Darius Payton had been in worse situations, in darker places, under skies that offered no stars, and with enemies who didn't ask questions before pulling the trigger. This was child's play. A security guard's shaky hands pressing him to the pavement outside a train station, his coffee still steaming near his spilled pack, the bag with his sleeping roll kicked aside like garbage. The name Darius Payton meant nothing to the crowd that walked past, just another homeless vet, another dirty coat. But the old man on the ground didn't groan, didn't resist, didn't even raise his voice. His silence was his discipline. His breath came slow, like he was still pacing himself for a recon run. "Hey, hey!" one of the bystanders called out, a woman with shopping bags. "What are you doing? He didn't do anything." "Ma'am, this individual was loitering and resisting questioning," the young cop said. "Barely 23. Probably fresh out of the academy, his badge too shiny, his fingers trembling just enough that Darius could feel it through the cuff. I was eating a muffin and feeding a bird," she snapped. "I asked him to move along. He wouldn't comply." Darius said nothing. He looked straight ahead, not at the people, not at the officer. He was watching the patterns on the sidewalk, broken, faded, stained, like him. The handcuffs tightened around his wrists, and still, he didn't make a sound. It wasn't the first time. The bus station's entrance doors hissed open. A security supervisor stepped out, radio buzzing at his hip. His gaze fell on the scene. "That the guy from last week?" he asked the cop. "No, different one. Same corner, though." "Great," the man muttered. "Take him in. Maybe that'll keep the rest away." That was how it always started. Not with a crime, not with a shout or a threat, just a presence. Just being seen where people didn't want to be reminded of the forgotten. The cop's car smelled of synthetic leather and stale coffee. Darius sat in the back like he'd sat in thousands of transports before. Knees forward, back straight. His boots were worn, cracked. Not the ones the army gave him. Those had been stolen a long time ago, back in the shelter where you learned fast that if something wasn't strapped to your body while you slept, it was gone by morning. "You got a name?" the cop asked, glancing at him in the mirror. Darius nodded once. "Well," Darius painted. The cop typed it into the mobile terminal mounted to the dash. "Middle name?" Darius didn't answer. The silence stretched. "You've been arrested before, Mr. Payton?" Darius's jaw tensed. He stared out the window. The city moved around them. Gray, fast, indifferent. "Better? No. Fine, we'll see." They reached the precinct, and the routine began. Fingerprints, photo. No personal items to check in, except the backpack and the small plastic container that held what little Darius still called his own. Dog tags, a crumpled VA letter, and an old metal case, scuffed and silent. In the holding room, Darius sat across from a desk sergeant who looked like he'd seen too many of these. "Trespassing, resisting, vagrancy," the man muttered as he wrote. "Could chalk it up to same old story." A younger officer behind him leaned in. "You see the name?" "What about it?" "Payton. Like Darius Payton?" The desk sergeant frowned, stopped writing. He looked up at the man in front of him. Really looked, not just at the coat or the scruff or the dirt on his hands. The young cop whispered something. The older one squinted, then turned back to the form. I'll get him on the docket. Judge Prescott's courtroom tomorrow morning. Be my Prescott?" The younger officer's voice dropped lower. "She did time in JAG, right? Word is she served in Kandahar. Might know the name." The older man grunted. "If it's that Payton, Guess we'll see, the kid muttered. Back in holding, Darius stared at the cinder block wall. He didn't ask for his phone call. He didn't need one. The people who mattered, those he once would have called, were long gone. Dead, lost, or in places the system couldn't reach. He hadn't expected a medal when he got back. He hadn't expected handshakes. But he hadn't expected the silence either. The complete erasure, like he had been a ghost overseas and became a shadow the second his boots hit U.S. soil. Outside his holding cell, a janitor swept the hallway, glancing over with half pity, half practice. "Hey, man," the janitor muttered, pausing. "You a vet?" Darius didn't respond, but the man nodded anyway. "I see it. In the eyes." He moved on. In the dead of night, Darius finally spoke aloud. Just a whisper. He was a medic. We lost her on that second run. I carried her 3 miles, never told her mother. The guard on duty didn't hear, or pretended not to. Either way, Darius went quiet again. The next morning, the precinct van pulled into the back of the courthouse. Darius stepped out, chain-linked to another man coughing and muttering about a stolen bike. The guards processed them both through a gray hallway with peeling paint and flickering lights. When his name was called, it echoed too loudly in the chamber. Darius Elijah Payton. The room didn't fall silent. Not yet. But the woman on the bench, Judge Emily Prescott, stopped reading. Her eyes lingered on the document in front of her, then slowly rose to meet his face. And in that moment, the noise drained away, the clerk stilled, the murmuring lawyers stopped mid-sentence. Even the bailiff turned. Prescott set down the file. Her fingers were trembling. She stood, not just rose to attention, stood, with a sharp breath caught in her throat, like seeing something long buried. Darius didn't blink. She looked at him for what felt like a full minute. No one knew why the judge didn't speak at first. No one knew what had just changed. But something had. And now, they all waited. She didn't speak for several seconds. Judge Emily Prescott remained standing, one hand resting lightly on the wooden bench, the other clenched just slightly at her side as if resisting the urge to reach for something. Her gaze never wavered, fixed on the man in front of her like she was seeing a ghost, and in a way, she was. Darius Payton looked almost nothing like the photograph that once accompanied the highest commendation she ever witnessed during her time as a JAG officer, but she recognized the way he stood. Back straight, eyes forward, like there was still a uniform draped over his shoulders. The bailiff leaned in toward her. "Your Honor?" Prescott blinked, her voice finally returning in a low, measured tone. "Case number 32,194. The People versus Darius Elijah Payton. Charges include trespassing, resisting a peace officer, and loitering." She looked back at the paper, her jaw flexed once. Then she turned to the ADA sitting at the prosecutor's table. "Mr. Delgado, please approach." The young assistant district attorney, slick hair, expensive shoes, sauntered toward the bench, a hint of condescension in his stride. "Yes, Your Honor." She didn't raise her voice. "Do you know who this man is?" "Homeless trespasser, Your Honor. Picked up near Union Station yesterday. Minor charges." Her eyes narrowed. "That wasn't what I asked." Delgado gave a confused chuckle. "No, ma'am, I assume he's no one of particular concern. Doesn't even have a permanent address." Prescott tapped a single finger on the bench. Once. Twice. Then she leaned forward and whispered something that the court microphones didn't catch. Delgado stiffened. "Are you certain?" he asked, slightly pale. She nodded once. He turned, looked at Darius again, this time with a different kind of hesitation, and walked back to his table, suddenly far less composed than before. The judge's voice came back stronger now, formal, steady. "Mr. Payton, you are currently facing 3 misdemeanor charges. You have the right to an attorney. One will be appointed if you cannot afford legal representation. Do you understand these rights? Darius nodded once. Do you wish to speak on your own behalf? He hesitated, then took a step forward. Yes, Your Honor, he said. His voice was deep but calm, the edges of weariness present in every word. Not from the jail cell. From years. From decades. I wasn't loitering, he said plainly. I was feeding the birds, sitting still. I didn't raise my voice, didn't curse, didn't steal. I moved when they told me to, but they kept pushing. Prescott listened but said nothing yet. I've done that corner for months. I don't panhandle, I just sit. And I remember. The courtroom was silent. People weren't sure what to do with a man like him. He didn't look pitiful enough to pity. He didn't look angry enough to be threatening. He looked like a man who'd been forgotten by everyone but time. You remember what, Mr. Peyton? She asked, emphasizing the compilation of emotion. He paused. My guys, the ones who didn't make it home. Prescott nodded once, almost imperceptibly. You have no legal counsel with you? No, ma'am. She glanced toward the gallery. Empty rows, save for a few curious eyes. Then back to him. I'm inclined to dismiss the charges, she said. There was a ripple across the room. Delgado sat up straighter, lips parting like he wanted to object. But one look from the judge shut him down before the words escaped. But before I do, she continued, I need to ask you something. Off the record. He nodded. You served in the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, correct? Darius blinked. Yes, ma'am. Operation Crescent Storm, Helmand Province. You were point man on a raid that intercepted a weapons convoy headed toward a civilian village? He didn't reply right away. Then, you held a position for 48 hours without support, after calling off medevac to prevent revealing your team's location. 3 wounded, 2 KIA. You carried them out yourself. Still he said nothing. Prescott inhaled slowly. They gave you a Distinguished Service Cross. I remember signing the recommendation. I remember your face. Finally, Darius looked up. Not just looked, met her gaze, and something passed between them in that moment. Something the rest of the courtroom could not hear or feel or touch. That was a long time ago, he said softly. You were 28. He nodded. You saved 9 lives, Mr. Peyton. He said nothing. The judge turned back toward her desk and lifted a document. She tapped it once with the edge of her pen, eyes scanning. All charges are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Peyton is to be released immediately. Furthermore, she said, her voice rising slightly, I am directing the court clerk to initiate contact with the VA liaison and the city's Veteran Outreach Division. This man is not to return to the streets. The room didn't erupt in applause. That wasn't how courtrooms worked, but you could feel the shift, the quiet weight of justice being nudged back toward its center. Delgado stood slowly. Your Honor, Not another word, Mr. Delgado. He sat back down. Prescott looked at Darius one last time. There's a room waiting for you at St. Michael's. Quiet, safe. I've already placed the call. Transportation will be provided. Darius didn't move. They'll have your file, she said. The real one, not just the one that calls you a transient. And I've called the director personally. She's the daughter of a Gulf War medic. She'll understand. Darius's mouth opened slightly. For a second, his composure cracked. Wait, he asked. Just one word. Soft. Prescott stared at him. Because you were never invisible to me, she said. With a bang of her gavel, court was adjourned. Darius stood still. A guard moved to uncuff him, this time gently, his eyes downcast like maybe he had worn a uniform once, too. When the chains fell away, Darius brought his hands together slowly, rubbing his wrists out of habit, not pain. As he stepped down from the stand, a single voice from the gallery called out, A man in his 40s, ball cap low, flannel shirt. He'd been sitting in silence the whole time. "You're Darius Peyton?" the man asked. Darius turned. "My brother, he was in your unit, Anthony Griggs." Darius blinked. A memory rippled across his face like wind over tall grass. "Griggs," he said, his voice catching. "Yeah? He played guitar in the tents. Wouldn't shut up about his wife's lasagna." The man's voice cracked. "That was my mom's recipe. He used to make it on leave." They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They just nodded. Sometimes men like them didn't need more than that. Outside the courtroom, the morning sun was starting to pierce the clouds. Darius stepped through the glass doors and didn't flinch at the light. He wasn't a ghost anymore. And for the first time in years, someone had spoken his name and stood for it. The next morning came with no sirens, no steel benches, no questions asked behind mirrored glass. Darius Peyton opened his eyes to soft light peeking through gauze curtains and the muted scent of disinfectant mixed with lavender. The bed was firm but warm, and for the first time in years he hadn't slept with one eye open. He was in a small room at St. Michael's Transitional Housing for Veterans, nestled in a corner unit with a modest view of a quiet park. He sat up slowly, the muscles in his back stiff from too many nights on cement. A folded pair of sweatpants and a clean T-shirt lay neatly at the end of the bed. A pair of non-slipped slippers waited on the floor. Someone had even placed his belongings. His backpack, the container with his dog tags, the metal case, on the nightstand like they mattered. He swung his legs over the side and rubbed his knees, which now cracked like old branches when he stood. But he didn't feel broken this morning, just rusty. A knock at the door. "Mr. Peyton?" a voice called, feminine, warm, not too chipper. He opened the door slowly to find a woman in her 40s, short hair tucked behind her ears, a clipboard held loosely in one hand. No forced smile, no wide eyes trying too hard to be understanding, just someone who looked at him like a man. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Dana, the on-site case coordinator. Can I come in?" He stepped aside and nodded. Dana walked in, glanced around the room with a nod of approval. "You slept here last night?" "Yeah." "Any issues? Lights? Noise?" "No." He scribbled a quick note. "Hot meals in the community kitchen start at 8. Coffee's already brewing. There's an intake session at 9:30 with our VA liaison, and we've got some paperwork to walk through together before that. Basic info, medical history, discharge documents. Anything you've got." Darius said nothing for a moment. "Then you knew I was coming." He talked over what he'd said. The door opened. The call came in from Judge Prescott directly, which doesn't happen often, said, and I quote, "Give this man what he needs, no red tape." That's all I needed to hear. He lowered himself into the chair across from her, fingers steepled. "She served." "She did. Army JAG. She was tough but fair. I knew her when I worked out of Kandahar doing field med logistics." Dana paused. "I've seen the file, Mr. Peyton. You didn't deserve what happened to you out there, and sure as hell not what happened when you got home." He exhaled through his nose. A subtle but unmistakable crack in the armor. "Most people don't care." "I'm not most people," Dana said simply. "And this place? It's built for ghosts like us." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "Say something else." He tilted his head. "Yesterday, after the court hearing, a news stringer from a local blog was in the gallery. They didn't know who you were at first, just that the judge stood when she read your name. That kind of thing sticks. The clip went viral overnight." Darius sat up straighter, the weight of those words pushing at the part of him that had wanted to stay invisible. "I didn't ask for that. No. But the world finally looked, and sometimes that can't be undone." Dana handed him a printout. There, in grainy stills, was the image. Judge Prescott standing silently, Darius at the defendant's table. The caption beneath the photo read, "When the judge stood, The nation asked why. He set it down like it burned his fingers. "I'm not a hero." "I didn't say you were," Dana replied. "But you were honorable. There's a difference." He sat back in his chair, arms crossed. "I just did my job, and then came back to a country that forgot what that meant," she said softly. "But that tide might be turning." She paused again, letting the quiet settle between them before continuing. "There's a man outside, been waiting since 6 this morning. Said he knew you from Fort Benning. Name's Carter. Big guy, scar on the left cheek." Darius blinked. "Reggie Carter?" "Yeah." He stood before he realized he had. "Send him in." Dana smiled. "Thought you might say that." She rose, opened the door, and stepped into the hallway. A moment later, heavy boots thudded on the tile floor. Then a figure filled the doorway. Broad-shouldered, grayer now, but unmistakable. Reggie Carter. "Damn, Dee," he said, his voice gravel and history. "Told you you'd outlive all of us." Darius cracked a smile, the first real one in years. "Still ugly, Carter." Reggie stepped forward and pulled him into a bear hug that made Darius grunt under the weight. "I saw the clip," Reggie said. "Didn't believe it at first. Then I saw that slow blink of yours. Same one you used when we got pinned at Checkpoint Echo? You were the one who got pinned. I was the one dragging your ass back." Reggie laughed. "God, I missed that mouth." They sat down across from each other, two men who had faced death together and somehow lived past it. For years they'd been scattered, part of the long diaspora of forgotten soldiers. "I looked for you," Reggie said, "after I got stateside. Heard you were in Ohio. Then nothing. Your name fell off every grid. Didn't want to be found." "I know. But you didn't deserve what happened after you came home. They screwed us all. But they screwed you worst." Darius stared at the floor. "They buried it, covered it in bureaucratic mud." "I know, but not anymore. You've got people again, and not just me. Word's spreading. Couple of the guys from the old team messaged me. They're coming out next week. You're not alone anymore, man." Dana returned with 2 cups of coffee, quietly setting them on the table. "I'll leave you too," she said. "Take your time. When you're ready, the world's waiting." They didn't speak for a long while after she left. The room smelled like hope. Hope and coffee. "Reggie," Darius said finally, his voice low. "Yeah?" "Whoever you ask." "Why not just tell him? You are mostly..." Reggie leaned back and crossed his arms. "Because you saved my life. Twice. Once over there, and once just now. Seeing you stand there, man, reminded me who I was." Darius looked out the window. The wind moved through the trees outside, rustling leaves that had once fallen but now danced again. "I'm not who I used to be." Reggie smiled, slow and certain. "None of us are. But you're still Darius Payton, and that still means something." For the first time, Darius believed him. The ceremony wasn't supposed to be a big deal, not according to the city clerk who called St. Michael's to inform Dana. Just a small recognition, the voice had said over the phone. Veterans Affairs, a few city officials, a handful of news outlets, nothing major. But by the time Darius Payton stepped onto the marble steps outside City Hall, the air buzzed with something different. Chairs had been set out in rows. American flags fluttered in the soft spring breeze. The crowd stretched from the steps to the edge of the square. Young families, old vets in worn service caps, reporters adjusting camera rigs, and just behind the podium stood Judge Emily Prescott, flanked by Reggie Carter and 2 other men Darius hadn't seen in over a decade, Luther Dominguez and Kyle Mercer, his former squadmates. He didn't recognize Kyle at first. The man's once flaming red hair had turned silver, his frame thinner. But the moment Kyle stepped forward and gripped Darius by the shoulders, eyes misted with something unspoken, the years peeled away like old paint. "You kept your promise," Kyle said. "Told us you'd never let our names be forgotten." "You remembered mine," Darius said back. A tap on the microphone sent a quiet echo across the square. Judge Prescott leaned forward, her voice even, clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for a long overdue recognition. Today isn't just about one man. It's about every veteran who walked back into a world that didn't see them, who came home in silence, and who, despite that silence, kept serving in the shadows." She glanced toward Darius, her jaw tight with the effort to maintain composure. "I've known Sergeant First Class Darius Elijah Payton for over 20 years. I signed his recommendation for the Distinguished Service Cross while serving as a military legal officer in Afghanistan. His actions saved countless lives. But it wasn't until last week that I saw him again. Chained, unshaved, and accused of being a nuisance for sitting too long on a bench." She turned to the crowd. "Does that sound like the nation we swore to protect?" The silence that followed wasn't shameful. It was reflective. A collective breath of people seeing something they'd ignored for too long. In recent days, his story has traveled far beyond this city. But the real story is not just in his awards or in what he endured. It's in what we do next. She stepped aside, nodding to the MC, who approached with a scroll and a velvet box. The mayor, a younger man who had served a single peacetime tour with the Navy, cleared his throat before speaking. "Sergeant First Class Payton, it is the great honor of this city to recognize your service, both on and off the battlefield, for your valor, your resilience, and your unwillingness to abandon your brothers and your country, even when it abandoned you. We present you with the City of Brookhaven's Medal of Civil Merit. And more importantly," he reached out with the scroll, "formal and public apology." Darius stepped forward. The applause that followed wasn't polite, it wasn't rehearsed. It rose from the crowd like a storm building from still water. People stood, clapping, some with tears in their eyes, others with hats pressed to their chests. A child on her father's shoulders raised a small hand in salute. Darius didn't speak right away. When he did, it wasn't into the microphone. He turned to the veterans behind him, Reggie, Luther, Kyle, and gave a nod that said everything. Then, reluctantly, he stepped to the podium. "I was trained to speak with action," he said, voice a low rumble, "and I'm out of practice with words. But I know what it means to feel unseen." He scanned the crowd, pausing briefly on a teenager wearing a junior ROTC pin. "Every day I sat on that bench, I wasn't waiting for help. I was remembering my team, my decisions, the ones who didn't get to come back and fade into the crowd." He gripped the podium a little tighter. "People ask me now what I want. Truth is, I already got it. You can keep the medals, the honors in the eyes I see looking back at me now. That's all I ever wanted, for someone to look back." He stepped down, and Reggie caught him in a side hug that nearly lifted him off the ground. The ceremony continued, but Darius had said all he needed to. He drifted through the crowd afterward, shaking hands, sharing brief words, letting people place their own meaning on the moment. A young girl gave him a crayon drawing with the words, "Thank you for being brave." A teacher handed him a stack of letters from her third graders. Some of them wrote poems, she said. "They don't know you, but they felt something." At the edge of the crowd stood Dana, holding his VA folder and a coffee in a paper cup. "Hero status confirmed," she teased, handing him the coffee. He smirked. "I liked it better when I was invisible." "Too late for that now," she said. "People are watching. Some of them even care." He sipped the coffee and looked back at the podium, now empty. Judge Prescott was speaking quietly to a mother and son, her expression soft. "Prescott really pulled this together," he said. Dana nodded. "She used to tell me justice wasn't about verdicts. It was about visibility. Today proved her right." "Yeah," Darius murmured. "It did." Later that week, a letter arrived at the Transitional Housing Center. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, a note. You didn't know me, but you saved my father's convoy that day. He came home, raised me, taught me what sacrifice meant. I just wanted you to know you weren't forgotten, not by all of us. A grateful daughter. Darius sat with the letter for a long time. Then he tucked it into the same box where he kept his medal and dog tags, not to hide it, but to preserve it, to remind himself that sometimes, when you survive long enough, the country does look back. Months passed. His hair grew out, his weight returned. He took a part-time job at the Veterans Community Center, guiding younger vets through their own reintegration process. People listened when he spoke, not because he was loud, but because he had once chosen silence and now used words sparingly like bullets. And sometimes, when he walked through the city, people recognized him. They didn't always ask for autographs. Sometimes they just nodded. And every now and then one of them stood up,